This video was supported by Keychron.
So this is where we kind of left off in the project of the concept desk build, which if you haven't seen the previous video, you might want to check that one out. It goes into more detail as to why I built this thing and kind of the philosophy behind it. Where we left off, basically, you had the DaVinci Visual Speed Editor in the middle, the Loopdeck CT to the side, and I added a laptop stand, but then it turned into like a keyboard stand because of course the voice access that we were using initially to control the whole setup wasn't really working. And yeah, so I reached out to Keychron, asked them if they wanted to send out the Q11 keyboard. The reason being is that there's not enough room on the entire setup to kind of have a normal keyboard there, right? And so by splitting this up into two pieces, it would be a lot more usable. They just sent it over without actually asking me to say anything. They were just like, I hope it helps you. And I really appreciate that. I would love to work with companies like this. So you can actually choose to get a keyboard with the switches or without. So if you have your own preferred switches, you can add those. They actually come with two knobs at the top of each corner, and those are fully customizable. Actually, the entire keyboard is fully customizable in the software. And the software isn't like ordinary software, it's actually a web-based application. In terms of the build quality as well, it's a fully CNC machined case, so it feels really solid, so to say. I feel kind of sad integrating it into these plastic 3D printed components in this video actually, because the build quality is so nice. In terms of the split nature of it as well, I really appreciate this because you could also use this as a gaming keyboard, so to say, where you unplug the right side and then you have a lot more space for your mouse. So if you do any kind of FPS shooters, that would be really useful. But the way I wanted to integrate this thing is actually with 3D printed components, so it's actually flush mount with the desk setup. The way I go about this usually is just taking a picture of the device that we want to integrate, then measuring up one piece of it, making sure that the picture kind of lines up, and then doing the rest of the CAD drawing around that. Usually what I do though is I print the first one in like a very thin little sheet, and then I test fit it, see where there's any issues, adjust it a little bit, and then move on to the final design. Now in this case, most of the edges actually have a tiny little chamfer on them, or like a roundover, and I use this multi-tool which we'll be building in the next video actually. It has like radius gauge sets on the side. If you're interested in that, definitely consider subscribing to this channel. There's some really awesome videos coming up with some really awesome sponsors as well, so that's pretty cool. So the design that I came up with was basically just taking the original mount, adjusting it a little bit so that I can flush mount with the keyboard inside of it, and leaving some gaps so that USB-C cables can still connect to it. And I actually bought some of these angled connectors that just about fit. It's a bit of a hassle to get it in there in the end, but those will allow the USB-C cables to go down into the build instead of straight forward, which would have caused some issues. I actually took apart the entire setup because there's a lot of 3D printed components on this thing that I don't want to damage, and we do need to jigsaw out some bits for the keyboard to fit. So I just held it in place, marked out where we needed to jigsaw out some extra pieces. What I noticed is that my jigsaw blade is too big, so I wasn't able to use it properly. And I was just like hand holding it a little bit above the wood, which resulted in like quite a lot of tear out. And so I was kind of hoping actually that the 3D printed components would cover up that tear out, but that wasn't really the case. You could clearly see that I did a bad job at the jigsaw run. I had to go back and fill it up with some wood filler. I used that white stuff again that I used in the previous video as well. Isn't that big of a deal. It kind of looks like a sketch, right? As if you would sketch something out on a piece of paper, but then in woodworking. It kind of fits the theme, like certain parts are really beautiful and certain parts are really showing its wear and tear, as if it's a very functional yet still beautiful thing or something. I also gave it another cable hole at the bottom which will allow the cables from like the audio box go and that kind of stuff to go to the main computers and also go to the microphone. After this I put everything back together and put all the keyboards in place, all the editing panels back in place. Aesthetically it also fits quite nicely with the DaVinci Visual Super Speed Editor because those buttons are kind of the same greyish blue, and the red buttons also match up with that speed editor. So in terms of the display, you can also adjust it like so. Sounds really jarring, but I mean, in this configuration, it'd be really nice to use it with that projector, so you have a stable input source, so you can actually like start up the computer and get something done real quickly. Because with the laser projector, I noticed that sometimes you would start it up and it wouldn't really find the source, that kind of stuff. So somebody in the comments also pointed out that it would be nice to have a cap on these because it looks kind of ugly, but I wasn't able to find these in time for the video release. So I hadn't actually realized how not great my other keyboard actually is until I typed on this thing. In terms of the split nature of it as well, it's actually exactly in the correct position for my like ergonomic needs, but I do have to shift over with my chair. So I kind of roll over to the keyboard side, type quickly something, and then I roll back to the editing side. But it really makes you focus as well because, you know, when something's rendering and it takes like a minute, what I used to do on the old computer was actually quickly go onto YouTube and watch a YouTube video. And so even though it took 1 minute, you know, I'd be 10 minutes deep into a video and that would be some wasted time. And so in terms of the control surface, actually, I bought like a Wacom tablet, especially for this project. And I haven't talked about it up until this point because I'm not entirely sold on it yet. But the funny thing is I've actually used it with a mouse on there. The nice thing about it is it has buttons on it. So it's kind of become a control mousepad. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, gave you some inspiration for your own build project, and hopefully see you in the next one.